Well, you can't do more without less without doing three things. The three things are: stop doing some of the stuff you don't need to do it differently, which can be, using technology or outsourcing some of it, or run hot.
Welcome back to the Be Continued podcast. We are Jess, Hilton and Ralph Tribe from Be People Group, and we're delighted today to be joined by our guest, Jane Chesters from Orion. And today's episode is focused much more on HR transformation. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Nice to have you here. So to start with, can you give us a little bit of an overview of your background and what it is that you do today?
Sure. So 35 years in and around the HR function, which is a bit scary. Starting out in personnel, in food manufacturing, and then practitioner for the first 10 years of my career. I worked in HR for a large management consultancy and then moved out of HR and into consulting. And 25 years ago, set up Orion with another couple of guys. And we have been in the space of HR transformation for those last 25 years. So starting with asking the question in organizations, what's your strategy? What does that mean for your people strategy? And then typically the question is then, how well equipped are you as an HR function to deliver on that strategy? Which can then mean change, shape, technology, capability, a whole range of different activities that we've been involved in with large, small, public, private, UK, international, and one of those organisations, Sky, was where I met Ralph. So that's how we know each other.
I didn't know that.
And what was it, Jane, that actually those 25 years ago that prompted you to start an HR transformation consultancy? Because it must have been almost one of the original ones. I'm not aware that there was one which existed before. So how did you go, I think there's a market for HR transformation and I should, along with two friends, sort of set off and do this?
It. Yeah. Two reasons, really. So the work that I was doing for the large management consultancy that I worked for at the time was in the nascent world of HR outsourcing. So it was an organisation that had been in the outsourcing market as one of its services for a long time in finance and accounting, in IT, and thought, obvious next place to go is HR. But realised quite quickly that HR was a bit more complicated than straight accounts payable, accounts receivable processing, because HR is a much more intrusive function into the organisation. You're working with employees, not just with people needing their bills paid, so it was more complex. So I was in that area as an expert. I remember actually when I moved from being in HR to consulting, the managing partner of the change practice that I worked for said, we're looking for people with deep functional expertise. And I thought, okay. And I realized he was talking about me, and I was like, okay, deep functional expertise. So I was working in that part of the business, trying to convince HR functions to outsource a large chunk of their organisation to us, which was quite hard to do. I was part of the team that did the first third-party deal as an HR outsourcer, a large global organisation who outsourced all their transactional activity to us. But with the other two guys that I was working with, realised that there was a gap in the market to help advise organisations thinking about that.
Oh, okay.
So do we, don't we? Why would we? The reality is then that once we'd started Orion, we actually didn't do that much of that kind of work because not as many organisations went, everything in the kitchen sink outsourced to a third party. There was obviously quite a lot of single functional outsourcing, recruitment, some elements of learning, etc. But we did then a lot more work with, okay, what are we trying to achieve as an organisation? What does that mean for our HR function? And therefore work on operating models, technology, change and transition. And 25 years on, we often have the conversation that says, really, have we not there yet? Have we not transformed? And the answer is no, because we're, as we'll be talking about today, it's a constantly evolving position. You know, things go in cycles, things move, things change. So that transformation agenda is what's actually happening may be different, but organisations, in my experience, still need help with. They know where they want to get, but they often don't know quite how to get there. So.
And notwithstanding the fact you don't do that much stuff about outsourcing, like
it's typically a question that you ask.
But you just mentioning it just makes me sort of think, God, I haven't thought about outsourcing for a long time. Has outsourcing sort of of HR gone away, or is it very much still a real thing that we're just not noticing? Or?
It's definitely a real thing in what those organisations would call single tower outsourcing. You know, what we were trying to sell was give us everything. You know, just have a few strategic business partners, but we'll take. And it needed to be fair, big enough organisations that it warranted doing that. And typically people were doing that to reduce cost, to get investment in technology that they wouldn't otherwise. So they were leveraging technology investments in the outsource provider that they weren't going to make themselves. But doing it end to end, in my experience, most people have taken quite a lot of that stuff back. I mean, the examples were people like BT, Unilever, P&G, who outsourced big chunks, and slowly but surely stuff came back.
And why?
I mean, I think people much more comfortable with payroll, not an issue. Recruitment done well, you know, fine. But the advisory stuff being outsourced to teams where the way in which you deliver that and make a margin is to put it somewhere else. Just
offshore.
Didn't work as well. So, you know, I think certainly, recruitment outsourcing, payroll, elements of specialist employee advice and guidance have worked really well in you know, that as a specialist provision, or in the SME market where if you haven't got it, why build it? Just go and buy it.
Yeah.
You know, I would certainly advocate to smaller organisations, you know, why would you buy it when you can get, you know, decent service from others? But if you've got a large in-house function that needs dismantling, it wasn't the next big thing that I think the Accentures, the IBMs of this world thought it could be. So.
Yeah. And you must be in a position where you have access to viewing so much. I mean, 35 years HR experience, 25 years in consultancy, and in Orion, I mean, you have a really strong list of large clients and brands. So what do you think?
Small but mighty, yes.
Yes, exactly. Aspirational. What do you think are the kind of biggest shifts that you're seeing at the moment?
The biggest shifts, the things that I think we've seen really impacting over the last few years. When we first started in business, the world of HR technology was still about making HR more efficient, you know, taking processing challenges out of the HR function. The way in which the technologies that are leading the way these days are positioned as much more as a business tool that gives managers, you know, self-service was just about, you know, recording your own changes to your name and address. And that doesn't happen very often, and it's not a particularly exciting transaction. But these days, the tools that are in the hands of managers to actually help manage their employees so that's been a significant shift, and AI will make that quicker, slicker, more intelligent, and much more user-friendly. So that, I think, has been a shift from it being about efficiency in HR to being about people managing their people more effectively. Links between HR and the ESG agenda. I've seen quite a lot of HR teams having elements of that, particularly when you think about diversity, inclusion, sustainability. That is an area that wasn't typically the remit of the HR function. I think the communications agenda goes in and out. You know, sometimes it's very firmly led from the people function. In other areas, it's more a marketing, internal corporate affairs, and there's a relationship. Wellness and great place to work, balance, etc. particularly post-COVID in the UK, was a really major shift. It was something, we went from historically welfare being part of the personnel agenda to it absolutely not being part of the agenda, to being back on how do we retain. And if we're going to retain people, we need to be thinking about work in the context of their life rather than them having a life outside of work. And I think also the whole kind of multi-generational workforce and how the proposition that we have for employees needs to vary by the different kind of stratas of the workforce. AI is having a major impact. So, we'll talk about that later, I think. But so those, I think, are the shifts I've seen. But still a lot, life has moved on from when I was having a lunch with a client earlier today, and we were talking about when we started. And, I sat in an office and I hand wrote something that I gave to a secretary who typed it and put it in an envelope, and it went round in a post tray. And if I talk to my kids about that, they think I must have been there with a quill and, a wig on, like some Dickensian. But it wasn't actually that long ago that is how we were communicating in organisations. So, life has changed, and therefore the people challenges have changed.
Yeah. I wonder if in 20 years' time I'm going to be selling people and I had to put the skills into Recruiter and I type them all in and then you run a search and then in terms of, so HR transformation, you kind of introduced Orion a little bit in the beginning, but can we do a deeper dive into that? So what's the process? How does it start with a client? Do they have a problem they're wanting to solve? Is it wide scale transformation? What does it look like?
It varies. It does vary. So, we are on a spectrum from what's your strategy? What are the challenges you're facing? How well equipped are you to deliver? The ideal client would come to you at the beginning of that journey, and typically then, therefore, that client is a new HR director or new to that organisation, and they're coming in and going, I want some work with my leadership team to think about these issues. Or they've been there for a while, but they know that stuff's not working as well as it should. And sometimes that's a cost pressure. Quite often it's a cost pressure, but other times it's we need to work differently because we don't have the flex, we don't have the... So the questions then are, what is the best way for us to think about how we work with the organisation to deliver what's needed? And that typically does then go into conversations about how are we organised, how do we work with the organisation, how do we use technology, do we do all of this ourselves or do we need to outsource some of it? And that's going to cost money. So what's the business case? How do we get investment? Because typically there is investment required, because you can't just do more with less or just stop doing certain things. And, there is a piece of work to be done typically to move from one state to another. It's not something you can just, wake up on, the next day and say, right, you're all in a different place now, work differently. There's work to be done to do that. Sometimes the work is just that front end advisory, but typically organisations need, even if it's a light hand on the tiller, thoughtful, thought partner to critical friend to work with. We are small, as I said at the outset, but that's not the reason why we would always advocate. Actually, ideally, the client leads this, and it's a small team where we're kind of helping in the background because actually the client needs to own it. Mm-hmm. And in our experience, when large teams of consultants are brought in to do too, it doesn't work very well. I mean, as I said, I was with a client at lunch today, and we worked with them over a period of a year to help work through a new model, some of which was quite painful for them, but they've got there, and it was very gratifying today for her to say, it really has worked. It's so much cleaner. It's so much slicker. I now just think, where should that work go? It goes here because that's the Lord. And that's really nice to hear because, sometimes you do leave, and without that impetus, if people haven't really bought into it and they're just doing it because they're being told to, then it all goes all goes to shit, and then it's not quite as gratifying. So it is nice to hear when it definitely was the right thing to do, and you've had the leadership behind that team to make stuff stick when it gets tricky, because it does get tricky.
So you were saying it was just a passing comment. You can't necessarily do more with less.
No.
And sometimes I have to say I wonder about that. I don't know about more, but you
can't do more without less without doing three things. The three things are: stop doing some of the stuff you don't need to do it differently, which can be, using technology or outsourcing some of it, or run hot for a period of time. But running hot for a period of time is not sustainable. And that seems like a really simple list, but it's absolutely true. Those are the three things.
What does running hot mean?
Running hot, by that I mean not enough people to do the work, just work a bit harder for a given period of time. But you can't do that forever, because people burn out, stuff doesn't get done that needs to get done. So it is, do it differently, don't do it, or agree for a short period of time. That kind of cost quality time triangle will get stretched a bit, and you'll just have to get on with
But
it.
the thing about not doing it.
Yeah.
So this is because we often, we don't do HR transformation at Be People, but we work with teams to sort of see how they can innovate, and in order to innovate, they often have to find some capacity or time to innovate.
Yeah.
And often we're talking with teams about, look, do you know how much of the stuff that an HR function does has ever made any difference to the world, right? And if you sort of increasingly you've got tools at your disposal like a ChatGPT or a Gemini or a Copilot, where you can do your own research to sort of go, well, in terms of doing diversity and inclusion in the way that we currently do it, has that ever made a difference when done like that to any organisation ever, anywhere? And actually, it's scrapes the web.
Depressingly, the answer
It scrapes the web, and it's not to say it's not important, and that there aren't organisations who have made massive strides in the worlds of diversity and inclusion, but they haven't necessarily done it by doing it the way that it is done most often.
Yeah.
So what's your sort of sense of that? Because it strikes me that HR, it's not just HR. There's lots of corporate functions do loads of things that there's never been any evidence that it will make any difference to the fate of the fortunes of the organisation they work for. And yet sort of custom practice sort of seems to insist that we carry on doing it.
Yeah.
And we're often just sort of left wondering and discussing with HR teams, what would happen if you
didn't do that anymore?
Factually, it would appear that what would happen if you just didn't do this is you'd add more value, because you wouldn't expend organisational resource on something which is never, ever proven to make any difference. You will have done that in a lot more organisations over time than we have. So what's your sense of that?
There are two things I think I would say to that. One is, how well connected are you really to what this organisation is about? I remember you asking me the question when we were being grilled for come and work at Sky, because we'd been brought in by a former client to have a conversation, and Ralph said to me, so what's great HR? Was one of those trip up consultant questions.
It wasn't meant to trip anyone up. I was interested.
So
I needed to know. I was like,
so what's great HR? And I said, it's what that organisation needs. It's really, really understanding what is going to make that organisation more profitable, more productive, get it closer to where it needs to. So it has to start, the question has to be, how well connected are you? And that is going to be through the effectiveness of your leaders and the effectiveness of your operating model and but the credibility. A lot of the time when I come back to what works and why was that successful there and it wasn't somewhere else is, I'm going to ramble a bit here, but two things. Does that organisation genuinely believe that people will make a difference, and in the getting a greater level of discretionary effort out of its people is going to make it more profitable or ensure it delivers what it needs to do? So does the organisation believe it? Because even if you're the best HR director in the world, if you work for an organisation that fundamentally does not get that, then banging your head against a brick wall is going to be your day-to-day existence. So as a leader of the function, are you connected? And therefore, do you have the platform, the permission to work in that way? And then, and this isn't where I would start from, because I would hope that that's a more sort of aspirational, motivational place to start. How well connected are you? Cost. There is nothing like a bit of pressure on cost to get people really focused on what matters. And I hate to come in and start a program where people say, right, we've got to take 20% out. Because people will typically salami slice, just not rehire, etc. And that doesn't work either. But there is, I also am genuinely more comfortable when there is a bit of pressure on cost, because it does get people to go, well, actually, if it's this or this, it's this, rather than, okay, we'll do both of them badly. It forces organisations to make a choice. I mean, when we work together, we were at, and lots of people start with, it's not about cost, it's about a greater service. But then when you build that service, it gets actually more expensive. And then when somebody goes, actually, we need to save 2 million quid. Okay, right, we'll get our pencils out and we'll sharpen them and cost does focus the mind. So, sorry, that was a very rambly answer to...
It's like a prioritisation model then. Is it easier than one might expect it to be when you actually just have to make the decision on what's important? Is it as easy as what's more important, or sometimes these things actually aren't important at all?
Yes, I mean, typically we will say, right, you've got 100 quid to spend. What are you going to spend it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
But we would always start with, you have to have the conversation with the organisation that says what is important. And that is not, what HR service would you like? Because everybody would like room service. Everybody would like, I'd like it to be easy, I'd like it to be accurate, I'd like it to be pain-free, I'd like it to be... But you can't necessarily afford that. So what you want and what you need are sometimes two different things. So having the conversation with the organisation that says, what are our strategic challenges? What does that mean in terms of people? Those are the things you need to do really well. And in different organisations, that you need to pay people and you need to follow the law. But that's the kind of base layer of stuff that everybody needs to get right. But then the priorities will vary by organisation. They'll vary whether you're growing, whether you're, in some organisations, your resourcing machine is the thing that is fundamental to your ability to open the doors and deliver to the customer. In other areas, it will be less that. It will be more about, how effective are your compensation mechanisms, or what's your performance management approach. So it's about really understanding what will make the difference in that organisation, and then being really, really good at those things. And you could be very average at the rest, as long as you do what you need to do. You don't need to be great at everything. That's
what happens if the organisation, so let's say, the chief executive and the C-suite are all saying that the thing that they want is something that there is no evidence that it will give them what they actually want. So, for example, performance rating scales.
Yeah.
Right, so we're often engaged in this. A lot of chief execs, fortunately not really ones I've worked with, but certainly ones I've come across as a consultant or, elsewhere. So I really do think that we need, numerical performance rating.
Yeah.
And we could all now go to, whatever AI engine or engine we use to go, is there any evidence that a sort of a numerical rating system ever added any value to any organisation? And actually what we'd probably discover is that most of the evidence is that it is in the margins probably value destructive. So what does an HR function do in that situation? If it's being told, having asked the organisation, what do you want? And it gets back to stuff where is this sort of... it's kind of opinion, but not necessarily based on any science or evidence or fact.
Well, I think there's two things. There's being better at using data and having the evidence that enables you to make those correlations between, if we're able to do this with engagement, we can actually prove that increases discretionary effort in this area, productivity, sales. So and you need to be able to not just say, look, our employees are more engaged. Isn't that fantastic? Well, it's nice, but it doesn't actually deliver any more value to the organisation It may, but you need to be able to quantify it. So being better at that. And then it goes back for me to that credibility of the person in the leadership role and the quality of the team around them, that they are seen as an integral part of that organisation and that their voice is as valued as any other person around the table. You know, if the marketing team were to come and say, we need to spend X on this, well, would anybody question? They should question in the same way as they would question the HR function. So being better with data. I remember once being in a group of people, it was in policing actually, where it was a team of business partners, and when somebody said, I don't really do numbers, I was like, I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear that. Because it's, you're not the accountant, but you do need to be able to say, this is the reason and this is the evidence, and be more, numerate or analytical, and be comfortable with not just a gut instinct, but a gut instinct that's based, on experience, but that's got evidence to.
Mm-hmm.
So, another dilemma, right? So we will definitely be in violent agreement that insight, data and evidence is really, really important to the perception and the actual added value of an HR function. And anyone listening to this will be going, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
What happens when the evidence tells the organisation something that's really quite counterintuitive, that it may not want to really believe? So, for example, right, say how many chief executives are out there going to their chief people officer, what I really want you to help and support me with is creating a high performance culture. Right? That seems to be something that's asked for quite a lot. If you dig into the science of what a high performance culture, what are the elements of it and what are the conditions that exist with it and so on, you will invariably discover that recovery is really, really important to high performance.
Recovery, right? In the sense of
rest.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Yeah, so any human being, right, if you want them to perform at their best, they must build in time to recover from sprints or periods of sort of great intensity when they're, moments where they have to perform. So it's effectively saying what you need to do is accept that people in this organisation, let's say it's a high pressure environment, they need rest. Yeah. And not only do they need rest, that will make them better. That will make them come back. And I don't know how easy it is for an organisation to really sort of embrace that as a concept, even though that's where all the science and all the evidence would take you if you're trying to explore what are the components of a high-performance culture that we could sort of, put into a framework and embed around here. Do you see HR sort of people, almost sort of getting brilliant on use of insight and data, and then when it tells the organisation something that it wasn't quite ready for, or actually reveals a really, really amazing insight that is counterintuitive, that the organisation maybe isn't quite ready for it, and it's like, whoa.
But for me, that goes back to the quality of the individual leading the function and the influence they have. Yeah. And it may be that they can't directly influence, but they know that in order to get to that other person in the organisation, they need to find other ways of influencing. I don't expect them just to be able to say, I can prove it and you need to trust me. But I have worked with some very effective HR leaders for whom, that is the relationship they have with their board. There will be no question that if that person is saying, believe me, this is how we need to tackle this, and I recognise it's going to be challenging, that will happen in that organisation. And I would like to say they're in the majority, but they're not. But I think, the quality of leadership and the credibility of that voice. People talk about HR needing a seat at the table. Yeah, absolutely. But they need to be properly in the conversation. Being at the table is not the same as being in the conversation, leading the conversation. And why shouldn't they? It's so I would say that's what's most important.
Yeah.
So they have to be credible enough to lead the conversation as well.
And that credibility will come from different things. I was again talking at lunch about somebody I knew at an organisation who has had significant people challenges recently, but that individual happened to be the HR director, was, at the time I was working with them, the retail director and the people director. They were in both, and quite often felt sort of slight crisis of confidence that they weren't a real HR person, but actually they were way more effective because they were a retail person first and a people. And we used to say to her, you've got more instinctive sense of where you need to go on these things than the majority. The reason you're now making the progress is because you understand the organisation inside out, but you also have an instinctive sense for what are the right things to do. I'm not saying that, HR people just need to be business people. There is a functional expertise. We are the experts and have the knowledge and understanding around the people agenda, but you need to combine those two things, I think, in an effective HR lead.
If in the last 5 years there's been a shift in like people purpose, well-being, these are all topics that maybe weren't as at the forefront before, does it not speak a little bit to employer branding if you're in a big business? And because I look at them all the time, and you might see they have obviously the main executive team, but then also chief product officer, chief marketing officer. But then if there isn't a chief people officer, you're a bit like, well, how important is the function to them? And even if they have like a really strong person in place and they do have, a significant voice in the business, then why aren't they on there? Yeah. So to me, I do judge it a little bit.
I think that's absolutely a very good point. I just sometimes think that HR people just spend a bit too much time worrying about exactly where they sit in the hierarchy of an organisation rather than the work they're actually doing. Because if it's really good work, it doesn't really matter whether you were or weren't on the executive team.
You can be called intergalactic HR god if you like, but are you actually doing anything that is? And
it's not even an HR example. I just remember, I don't talk about my time at BT very much. I wasn't there very long. But I just remember seeing this guy there. So I worked for one division within BT and had an extremely demanding chief executive, a chap called Alnor Ramji. He's very good. But my goodness, he was a very demanding man. And I just remember watching this guy, and he wasn't that senior, but the way that he was able to talk to Alnor Ramji in a big meeting where he could completely connect. He would just keep saying things like, Alnor, I know that this really bothers you and worries you and so on. And the thing that we're proposing, the way it solves that, and then he would give this perfect description of how it solves that real dilemma or concern that chief executive had. And this individual had so much more influence than the rest of us who were sort of sitting in the room. Much more senior hierarchically. But definitely not as able to, anywhere like as able to get through to this chief executive as succinctly and as cleanly as this individual. He was just a middle manager. I say, an extremely effective middle manager.
So issues that you solve, and Orion, I had a look online and it looks like there's I've written down here, there's like 5 areas of where you assist. So strategy, transformation, tech, so HR systems, capability, and change. I have a couple of questions. One is, this might be silly, but transformation and change, they seem like synonyms, but they're separate categories. What is the difference?
Well, for us in that, change is, so transformation we will be describing there as typically a new operating model, a shift in your operating model, something that will result in the structure of HR and the relationship that they have with the businesses needing to shift. So that is taking you from here's the way you're currently set up to being set up in a different way. And typically would also involve a business case for doing that, because there'll be an investment in technology or there'll be an investment in people who need to do things differently. Change, in the way we describe it there, is the journey that you're on and the support with making that happen. Program managing that, helping build capability. But it's interesting observation when you read it and think, well, aren't they one and the same thing? And Ralph and I were having a conversation the other day about, AI and how is transforming and is getting people to think about work and content of work and way of working in a very different way. But people still have to want to change.
Yeah.
I remember I did a lot of work with transport for London years ago, like at the beginning of Orion. And I remember going in then to see the commissioner, talking about what was going to be different in this new world, because McKinsey had come in at the very outset and at the creation of TfL, the design of the organisation, and said, right, this is TfL, and then you have the modes, you have London Underground, you have surface transport, etc. And there was work being done to centralise a lot of activity as a TfL kind of centre, shared service it was in those days. And then there was some stuff that sat out in the modes in LU, and prior to that, you'd had not many, actually quite big HR functions in each of those service areas. And I remember saying, well, the central function, the TfL service is going to do everything. It's going to pay people. It was going to, at the time, controversially do quite a lot of the employee relations and industrial relations support, which had historically been a huge part of what the HR function did. So all of that was going to be provided centrally. And I remember him saying, so if all of that is going to be in this central function, what are the HR people in the underground going to do? And I said, well, they're going to work with you to understand what the challenges are and strategy. And he said, well, I get PwC to do that, or KPMG to do that. Couldn't conceive that an HR function could provide the support that would be real thought partner. What are we trying to deliver as a business, and where do we need to? He definitely didn't see that as being something that the HR function would need to deliver.
And did it work? Did they do it? Are you allowed to say?
Did it work? Good question. Yes and no. So we took a lot of activity out of the individual business areas and centralised it, and definitely provided a more consistent, higher quality, more transparent, and were able to automate in a way that they wouldn't have done in the individual business areas. And interestingly, actually, one of the things that was a huge benefit was in centralising that employee relations, industrial relations activity that was quite controversial at the time. You all of a sudden had visibility of what was happening, whereas historically the only people who'd really had visibility had been the trade unions.
Yeah.
So actually it was very powerful because you were on an equal footing in terms of having that visibility. But the HR function went first. They were the only team at the outset that did that kind of centralisation. So finance didn't immediately, IT didn't immediately, and that was quite a lonely place to be. And I would say it's hard for HR if your operating model is highly decentralised, but your HR function is, it doesn't work.
Yeah, because you don't have the same influence.
No. No, you've either got you can say it's part of a journey and HR might go first, but your operating model's got to reflect your business operating model.
Yeah, the organisation sort of needs to get used to the idea of things being delivered from a central point, and just HR being the one that does it. Probably not enough to really get them there. It needs to be multiple functions for them to build, real habits about dealing with one function or another.
Yeah, and TfL in those days, it was a long time ago. I remember, what was his name? He was an American who was the commissioner for the first few years of the creation of TfL. I can't remember his name now, but an American who came from New York to do that role, come back to me. And there was a big meeting at the beginning of that sort of phase of their existence. And he said, who here works for TfL? Nobody stood up. Who here works for London Underground? A bunch of people signed up. Who here works for surface transport? And he then had a complete hissy fit and said, you all work for TfL.
Interesting.
And so if you then said, I'm actually HR, you go first in this culture where, hundreds of years of identity. London Underground is very different to the buses, is different to the taxis and that. So,
Yeah, interesting. And my other question, which might lead us into AI possibly, you mentioned earlier about the kind of consultation process, looking at what are your strategic challenges or strategic priorities. Are there any kind of big new things that you're seeing a lot of that you weren't, let's say, 5 years ago, kind of on repeat? Any of the big kind of strategic challenges that companies are facing that feel new? Or
I think AI is of a significant, what it's going to mean for the workforce, how the workforce is, what skills, capabilities are going to be needed, what work is just not going to need people to deliver it. That's significant. But also building skills with people who can manage that at the same time is going to be hugely challenging. And does HR follow that? As I said, one of the skills I think HR needs to be absolutely master of is OD and change, and that's at the heart of that. And are consultancies going to come in and make a killing by doing that work when actually it should be being done internally?
Yeah, because I saw a role being advertised the other day. I can't remember where it was. Chief People and AI Transformation Officer. It wasn't transformation, but it was where basically
combining the two.
It added into the remit of the Chief People and AI Enablement Officer was the name of the job. First time I'd ever seen it. I've not seen it since, but strikes me that this could be.
I think you're either going to lead it or be seen as being a major player, or you're just going to be sweeping up the restructuring activity that goes as a result.
Yeah.
Redesigning career paths is going to be part of all of this too. Thinking about how did I acquire my skills? I acquired my skills by working in lots of different parts of the function, doing all the, learning on the job. And a lot of that is not going to be there anymore. So thinking about what's that going to mean for future careers, etc. Cost and the economy that I think that's not a new challenge, but the AI impact and broader challenges we face around growth in the economy are there.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to ask, so you obviously work with a lot of HR teams, you network with a lot of HR sort of chief people officers and so on. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready do you think HR is for the opportunity that AI presents, and in particular playing a leading role in exploiting that opportunity for the organisations they work in?
Personal experience of the clients that I work with, on the curve, not ahead of the curve, I'd say. Definitely knowing it's fundamental to the way in which that organisation needs to think about itself. Definitely playing with tools themselves, just in their day-to-day work, whether they're using Copilot or, they are using it to tighten up their communication to help think, that's their start point for stuff. So individually people are using it. There will be a generational thing in that as to who's using it more than others. Have I personally been exposed to organisations who I would say are hitting it out of the park? No, not yet. And there are, I'm not bad-mouthing the NHS, but I know when I've had conversations, maybe it's just my exposure to people in individual trusts. I mean, that feels like another lifetime away. Being able to, they're still in the thick of dealing with stuff in a very challenging environment where they're just running very hard to stay still in a resource-constrained environment. So, and who's going to put money in their pocket to invest in all of that when the calls on investment are so huge? There's never enough money to go around, and so. But I do see some very effective HR leaders in that space, and very effective HR leaders, but not everywhere. So.
And do you find that you have a pressure to be? No one's an expert, but are you finding that you yourself at Orion are using AI, and does it give you like better acceleration or more efficiency or more insight into what it can do for other HR functions?
I think we're using it in the way that I would expect clients to be using it to get to certain things more quickly than I would if I did it in a more mandrolic way. I was putting together something for a client the other day where it would be helpful ahead of running a session with a group of HR leaders to understand where people are on that AI journey. And so I just, tapped into ChatGPT, right? I need to put together a series of questions that's going to enable me to assess the level of maturity. And 30 seconds later, here's a sort of 10 questionnaire, which it then says, do you want a maturity model? Do you want that in an Excel spreadsheet? Or, well, I mean, I had to ask the right question, but it's come up with something that's not half bad and would probably have taken, but it's interesting. Ralph and I were talking about this the other day. I still feel, and maybe this is being a bit of a girly swot and being a woman, maybe I could say this is a woman, that's sort of cheating. I want to sweat over it and do it myself, but it's bloody good, and it will be what I will use with this client, and it will be fine. But me facilitating the conversation with them will still be me facilitating the conversation, but I can very quickly, rather than create that by hand, it's just done it. It's just short circuited.
Yeah, I've just got to
comment on the being a girly swot or a cheat.
Yes, right. So it's just I read an article. Actually, it wasn't just the other day now, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. It was something like Forbes or Harvard Business Review, I can't remember. But it was making a very serious point, written by a woman, making a very serious point about how perhaps an indexing amongst women to that kind of attitude was going to be really problematic for women, because they'd interviewed a load of chief executives about AI and asked the question, I can't remember exactly how it ran, but it was something like 8 out of 10 female chief executives felt that using AI to accelerate or enhance work was cheating. Yeah. Meanwhile, 8 out of 10 male chief executives didn't feel like that at all. So, but you were just like, oh my goodness. I mean, completely. I mean, I think any man or woman hearing that would be, well, obviously. But you're like, shit. But if that's true, and women perhaps aren't using it as much because for whatever reason they feel like that's cheating, and that must put them at a disadvantage, and that's even more of a sort of a problem. So it's a funny thing.
I've got 2 daughters, and they are encouraged at school to use it in the right way, not to write your essay, but to do the research and they are quite dismissive of when somebody comes out something on ChatGPT, and it's they feel that the hard graft is valuable. Maybe that's because their mum's a girly swot and they've inherited the girly swot.
But I was also going to wonder whether maybe you just busted that, but whether there was some generational divide. Like, is it women in certain generations, like millennials and probably above, whereas like the younger generation who are coming in, and there's more foundation for women to. I don't know. That's actually not true, because I was going to say less pressure and stuff, but it's not.
I suspect you probably are right, Jess, because I've 2 adult daughters. I don't detect any of this girly swottiness about their attitude towards HR. I mean, they ruthlessly exploit it, right? Yeah. And that's a good thing, right? Because
everyone else is. But it's do I know what questions to ask? Can I spot when it's rubbish? But then there's other, I was talking about this with somebody yesterday, it is making life easier, but is it having an impact on our brains that we're not using our brains in the same way? That for every piece of evidence that says it's amazing, there's other evidence that says actually your brain capacity, your prefrontal cortex, which is burning brightly when you're really thinking about something, is not burning quite as brightly if you're not thinking about it. And also, it is a bottle of water every time you put a little question into ChatGPT, and apparently saying yes please rather than just consumes more energy. So I'm being a polite girly swot. I always say yes please, and I'm going to stop because it's consuming more water.
Yeah, you've got to be really curt.
Yeah, and just yell at it like my kids do Alexa.
No, look, I mean, it also strikes me, for all this thing about men and women and how they might use these things.
I actually don't think it's that kind of surprising, because even if I guess maybe sweeping generalizations here, but as a woman, maybe you fight more for your credibility. You don't have as much natural credibility, so you feel like that kind of learning curve or the appeal of cutting corners is less.
No, you need
the
to be
same way
twice
that
as
if
good at your job to
exactly,
be taken
if I
seriously.
interview
Yeah.
sometimes a man for a job that he doesn't quite have the right experience, he'll have a lot of bravado. He won't be
blag
worried
it.
about taking the job. And equally, sometimes I interview a woman who has great experience and she'll find reasons why maybe she's just not quite up for this job yet, you know? So
No, it's like, you know, again, massive generalization. As a woman, I will look in the mirror in the morning and go, oh, God. Whereas my husband will go, yeah, not bad.
God, no, I don't. I don't look in the mirror and go, oh my God, like what happened to the sort of the 30-year-old me? My wife laughs about it. I've still got a picture on my blue and driving licence of when I was 40. I probably shouldn't say that. I'll be arrested now. It's meant to be representative of what I actually look like. But that'll probably get edited out anyway. So
The other thing I would say that I haven't touched on, but that I think is a big theme, is the whole kind of experience and the user experience, the employee experience, and the personalization of that experience, that we have got far more, obviously, as consumers, that's how we want to consume. And most organizations, or certainly larger, more sophisticated organizations, are thinking about their employees in that way, and thinking about that journey, that they're, rather than, you know, dishing up, this is what you get, they are thinking about it in different ways. So for us, it's more context, because I will still come back to, that is what you're trying to achieve. Most people know where they need to get to, but they still don't know how to get there. Mm-hmm. And getting people to work differently is still the hard yard that needs to get delivered, and is still the stuff that, you know, I've always said on programs historically, you know, 80% of the money on transformation programs gets spent on the technology. If you're lucky, 20% gets spent on the change being communications, training, reskilling, just managing that. And I'm not saying if you flip it, you'll have a better chance of, but it's nearly always, or the technology bit's overspent, therefore let's cut the quality of the training. So, you know, the number of organisations I've worked with, when you say we've done all of this, we have spent millions of pounds, now let's invest, you know, 3 days of training with a team of business partners to better equip them to deliver. I don't know about that. I couldn't possibly spend 30 grand when we've spent, you know, 30 million on putting. So that making, you know, leading, managing change, which sounds a bit, you know, sort of soft and fluffy, is not soft and fluffy, and is bloody hard to do, and to do it well is really hard. So we see AI as a massive disruptor in terms of but we're not going to be the people that are going to tell you how to deploy AI. We're hopefully going to be the people that are going to help your people be better equipped to deliver on that.
So it's a really interesting one, actually, because you think about, you know, the AI platforms that are out there and being used in most organisations now, because they're bundled in with their whatever suite, whether it's Gemini with Google or Copilot with Microsoft, whatever the company's bought. What's kind of interesting, though, is like the expenditure on the technologies happened there. Yeah. And actually, all the value now is really on kind of usage and reimagination and so on.
But that's the case for most technology, isn't it? We know, you know, all from an HR perspective, all the stuff that PeopleSoft historically or Workday, SuccessFactors can do for you. It's not used in the way that it could be, because you have to get people to do something different, and they don't want to do something different. So I think... So
definitely,
adoption.
So true. But I suppose the point being, though, when you think about a Workday implementation, generally that's sort of assuming it's going in for the first time. A new system's coming. It's called Workday, for example, and that does cost a lot of money. No. And it is new money that needs to be found. Yeah. And so there is this real sort of focus on that, and then all the transformational sort of bits that might hang off it, you know, a bit secondary normally. Yeah. Here it is different because the company's got the technology already. Yeah. It's just not being used. So there shouldn't be the same fixation.
No, there shouldn't be. You're right. This is a preferencing tool. So it's not a personality tool. It's how do you prefer. It's not saying you can't operate in a different way, but it's how you prefer to work. One element of it is called the strategist, and that person is the person who likes to think bigger picture, organisationally, where are we trying to get to? One is an implementer, which is go do, get stuff done. One is a polisher, which is make things better, take the existing situation and improve. One is a playmaker, and that person is the person who gets their energy, their preferred place to operate is getting people to collaborate. They get more out of getting people to collaborate than they do the end result. And then there's a final dimension, which is the game changer, the innovator. So the person who's like throwing on why are we even doing it in the first place? And most people are a combination, but there's definitely, and there's having used that tool with lots and lots of HR folk, you pretty rarely find people who lead with game changer.
Oh, interesting.
You find strategists, you find polishers, you find implementers. It's really rare for me to see. I can think I've done hundreds of these profiles with HR teams. Really rare for me to see people leading with new, different, challenging. So it just made me think that innovation dimension hasn't inherently where we've needed to focus. It's not historically been where we've needed to focus. It's not about completely different. We have been much more about take something and improve it rather than completely reimagine it.
Well, it's an interesting dilemma and maybe one that we're going to have to almost end things with. But so if it's true then that in all the work you've done, the game changer is the rarest of profiles for HR people, and yet AI to be sort of fully leveraged for the HR function relies upon all HR people allowing and enjoying themselves to have a go at being a game changer.
It's a muscle that needs developing.
How easy is it to help someone become a game changer?
Because this doesn't say you can't do it. Yeah. It says that's not where you'll start.
It's their current preference.
Yeah,
that's not to say they couldn't develop a new one.
So they'll need that muscle developing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we haven't historically needed to, if I see a senior business partner or somebody heading into that kind of role who doesn't have any strategist dimension, I've always thought, that's tricky because they need to be thinking big picture. They need to be thinking. But I've not had to historically worry about the innovator because other than a sort of specialist in a centre of expertise where really new and different is what we're looking for sometimes, that's not been what you're really looking for.
Yeah, that's really interesting and a little bit open-ended and maybe a nice kind of position to leave it in, a bit thought-provoking. Where can you find that, by the way? I would love to look at that. Is it just something you do at Orion? Or is it
it's called the GC Index.
The GC Index.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a look.
We can have a conversation about it. I am a GCologist, so plug for the GC Index.
Yeah, I'd love to.
It's a really good tool. I use it a lot.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for your time. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great discussion, and thanks, Ralph.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.